Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty pinko commie soy boy cuck Antifa super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that reveals the distant taste of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is the leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. My tastes range, but mostly exist on opposite ends of the highbrow, lowbrow spectrum. And I'm with...
Hey, I'm Hal. I use she, they pronouns. I work in higher ed and run a food pantry. I care about food access, reproductive justice, building a robust social welfare state, and ending the state's domination of the criminal legal system. I'm a staunch defender of John Carpenter. Honestly, who isn't? Like, let's fight. And I even like bad movies based on his movies, like The Thing, 2011.
Yeah, and before we get to the show proper, we have a guest, our second ever guest on the Red Rose Film Club. Joining us today is the owner and proprietor of the oft-mentioned Cap City Video Lounge, Tallahassee's only video rental store and one-screen theater, and all-around good dude, Mr. Kevin Cole, a.k.a. the Primal Root. Kevin, how are you doing?
I'm doing real well, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah.
It is an honor.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. We definitely knew we wanted to ask you to do our first John Carpenter movie. So as I mentioned, actually, I'm going to cut that shit out because you're going to say that first.
Editing, post-production. So we talk about Cap City Video Lounge quite often on the podcast, and y'all just celebrated a big anniversary, right?
Yeah, we did. It was like 6 or 7 years. It all kind of blurs together.
Fair.
But yeah, we're getting there. We're getting up there.
That's awesome. So can you tell us a little bit about why you opened Cap City and what makes it a special place for, movie dorks like us?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, it started out, basically this is something I always wanted to do since I worked at Tallahassee's Movies 8, like the Dollar Theater, the second run theater.
Miss it,
rest in
R.I.P.
peace. Oh my gosh. And also Video 21, the last mom and pop video rental store. I always wanted to do stuff for them, like having a movie theater, being able to like create a community through Video 21, but it just, like at that point, Redbox and Netflix were taking over the market. The writing was on the wall. They were going under. So I started a once a month trash cinema night at Bird's Aphrodisiac Oyster Shack here in Tallahassee. And over the 8 years I did that, we gained such a huge audience, it would pack out the entire place. And the owner of Bird's asked if I had any ideas for a business. And I was like, as a matter of fact, I do. And so, yeah, we basically created it as a place for, an alternate to staying at home by yourself, watching movies all alone. You can come out and be part of a community. We have all the really weird titles that no one else is carrying. And also, we bring people together through like the Tallahassee filmmaker meetings. We try to bolster creativity. So that's us. That's Cap City Video Lounge in a nutshell.
We love you. We appreciate you. And we're glad that you're here and that the space that you've cultivated is really important to people that love cinema and all varieties of cinema in Tallahassee. So as we kind of move into our usual bits, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
I am getting into a lot of stuff these days. I've actually seen movies recently, which is normally, I'm just, this is a busy season for work for me. I fall off sometimes. But before I talk about a movie that I saw, I want to talk about an album that I really like, which is a new album called Road to Casablanca by this Philly rapper named Armani White. Do you know Armani White?
I am not familiar.
Yeah, this is kind of his first big studio project. He had a hit song called Billie Eilish, which is on this album. But I really like this guy. He is in the mold of Kendrick Lamar and JID, who I talked about on this podcast as well, of these dudes who can switch up their flow and kind of throw their voice and do these weird things with their verses and go from whispering to bombast screaming, and I just love it. Like I said, he's got this song Billie Eilish. He also has this tendency to almost say too many words in a verse, but then fit it in a way that it almost feels like a lot of his songs are puzzles. We're like, how did he he shouldn't have been able to put that many words into that line and still hit the rhythm of it. I like it a lot. And he also has a couple really good features on there. I love Denzel Curry, a Florida rapper who is on a track on this album called Goated. And he also has a great song with A$AP Ferg. So yeah, Road to Casablanca by Armani White is my one thing, but I do want to talk about a movie. I saw Evil Dead Rise.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Great flick.
You seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hal, have you seen it?
I have not yet. I am saving it to watch it at home because I'm too scared to see it on a big screen.
It doesn't hold back. Yeah.
Yeah, it is pretty scary.
Yeah, and mommy possession stuff is hitting a lot of buttons for me, so I absolutely will watch it. Of course, I've seen everything else in the series, but I don't need it on the full-size screen.
Yeah, it is. It's creepy, scary, and I also this is like the second big horror franchise that's moved of this year. Scream being the other one that's moved its kind of traditional setting and like quiet, isolated like town or cabin with Evil Dead into the city, and I think it works really well. And what I really like about Evil Dead Rise is the way they still find the like claustrophobia of it, like the horror conventions are still there and like trapping them in this space, so it still feels like isolated, but you still do get the sense of like more of a city vibe than that you don't get from the other ones. Kevin, what did you think about it?
Oh God, I thought it was fantastic. I was a little nervous going in because seeing the trailer and seeing the age range in the cast, I was like, okay, like what's going to make or break this movie? I don't want to spoil anything, but it's like, who are we going to be able to kill off in this thing?
Yeah.
And the fact that it's so akin to the original Sam Raimi Evil Dead, where it's just unrelenting and grueling, and anyone could go at any second. Like I adored it. I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's gross. And,
oh my God.
Yeah.
The cheese grater.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That was good.
You can go in there with some like red sour straws. It'll be kind of like interactive screening.
Yeah, I love like a good gross thing in a movie that gets the audience involved. And I was trying to remember actually when I watched that one, because our audience like had a huge reaction to that. And the one that I compared it to was when I saw it in theaters, the You're Next. Have you guys seen You're Next?
Oh yeah.
When at the end, when she sticks the open blender on the dude, like it was like a great just wrestling terms, an audience pop for some gross gore. What about you, Kevin? What have you been watching or getting into lately?
I recently saw Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and I thought that was fantastic. I'm not a big MCU guy, but I do love the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I thought it was a great send-off. I also saw Renfield recently.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Oh, we might disagree.
Oh, did you not like it?
Normally, I wouldn't have said anything. Except on our last episode, I was like, I saw Renfield. I wasn't a huge fan of it.
Oh, wow.
I loved like all the Nick Cage stuff and wish it was more of the Nick Cage stuff. Gotcha. And I liked a lot of the like inserting him into the old like Universal like the beginning where like they recreated the like Bela Lugosi scenes. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I did not like love the like crime story of it all. Like I thought maybe let's drop that to like a C plot and not the A plot of the movie was my big gripe. But
I can respect that.
But I love Nick Cage in it. And I like Nicholas Hoult too is great.
Yeah. Yeah, I really liked I wasn't anticipating liking it as much as I did.
Yeah.
But I really loved the meditation on like toxic relationships. Like I was not anticipating that at all. But
yeah.
And also William Ragsdale from Fright Night? He played the kid next door who sees the vampire. In Fright Night.
Who is he in this?
He's that last group of vampire hunters. He's like the priest who mist. You know what I'm talking about. I don't spoil anything, but
is he the one that like also did porn?
No, that's Stephen Joffrey. He plays Evil Ed in.
Okay.
It's also the star.
But also Fright Night, right?
Evil. He was in Fright Night. He plays Evil Ed.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Extensive porn career.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Hal, what about you? What have you been getting into?
Yeah, so I'll close us out. On Friday, I watched J-Lo's new movie, The Mother. So no one else. who is not your weird sister-in-law who's really into MLMs on Facebook, has to watch it. I'm here to report back. On the plus side, I will say it is vicious. Like, there is some nasty shit. Like, someone dies with a bottle through their neck in a really intense, gory way that when it happened, I was like, oh, this is what's going on. Cool. The rest of it is fucking horrible. The premise is that she is a enlisted member of the U.S. Military who has served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay. And by the way, she's the protagonist. She's supposed to be sympathetic, okay?
Oh, yeah. I'm watching this.
Mm-hmm. And she is involved in some kind of like illegal gun trading with two criminal masterminds and fucking both of them, gets pregnant, and then they take away, the FBI or the CIA take away her child as like a bargaining chip, essentially, to get her to comply. And so then the movie is like her defending the child who was not raised by her from these two men who are like competing to claim ownership over the daughter whose paternity is unclear. And again, I just want to emphasize the protagonist, the person that is supposed to be sympathetic, served in Guantanamo Bay. So that's absurd. Also,
Under Ron
yeah, maybe. The needle drops in this movie are insane. Grimes starts playing at one point, and at the very end, the final song is This Woman's Work by Kate Bush.
Heck yeah.
So, don't watch it. I'm sure there's like a TikTok that you can find of this man being stabbed in the neck with a bottle, and the rest of it is not worthwhile. And then also a couple of days ago, I started reading a horror novel called Skin by Kathy Koja. It came out in the early 90s. And it's about a woman who is a metal sculptor who begins to make like modifications to her body. And reading it, I'm like, I need a mid-90s Cronenberg adaptation of this now. Like, please travel back in time. And then it made me wonder, like, what is Julia Ducournau doing after? I know that she's working on the Dior TV show for some reason. I'm very curious to see what that looks like. But I don't think she has. I haven't seen anything coming up for her slated as a feature that she's working on. So I would like to propose that she take Titane to the next step and adapt this novel. And then the last thing I wanted to put everyone onto, and I'm sure if you are a queer person, you already know this is happening, probably. But Janelle Monáe's next album, The Age of Pleasure, is dropping on 69 on June 9th. And if you aren't aware that this is happening, I highly recommend you go look up videos for Lipstick Lover, which is the first single right now. Because one, it's good. I love Janelle Monáe. Also, you can see titties. So.
Hell yeah.
Is this her? Wait, no. What was her last album called?
Dirty Computer.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. 2018.
And then the one before that was... That's what I was going to say, because she hasn't had that many albums, right? Yeah. We love her. And who's she? What was the last movie she was in? I feel like I just saw her in something recently.
She was in Glass Onion. Yeah, she plays 2 roles in Glass Onion.
Did you like Glass
I feel like it's hard for me to say because it was a movie, they released at Thanksgiving. I want to say on Netflix.
The holiday season.
And so I watched it like with, like my partner's family, with everyone like kind of drinking or like, it didn't leave a marked impression on me, I would say. But I did not, on the whole, like the Elon Musk of it all that they were doing. Felt a little too on the nose. We'll talk about this a little later when we get into They Live, but to me, satire is a very, very thin line, and 9 times out of 10, I don't like it because I think it's not done artfully. And so, yeah, that was my kind of general impression of it.
Same, ditto. also felt like it felt a little bit more smug than whatever the other one was that I liked. That now I can't remember the name of. What was the first one?
Knives Out.
Knives Out. Yeah. It was, and also like to a man, everyone in Glass Onion is annoying. Like all the characters were obnoxious to me. Whereas like I know that was kind of the thing in Knives Out too. There was a lot of obnoxious characters. But at least you had like the Ana de Armas character and like a few other ones that were a little bit more grounded. Whereas in Glass Onion, I was like, God damn, these people are annoying.
Who do I root for?
I know, I could not find anything to hold on to in that movie. But Janelle Monáe, yeah. So, what's happening in the world this week, Hal, that's either got you celebrating or in despair? And I'm going to guess it's going to be despair based on us living in Florida.
Just based on track record, right? So, it's in response to despair, but it's actually something I want to celebrate, which is that we, and I say we because I literally mean me, as well as people I know, and hopefully you, after you hear this, are going to fight to put abortion on the ballot in Florida. So if you don't live in Florida, or maybe you're just not aware about what citizen referendums exist in Florida, this is not true in every state. In some states, you can introduce a citizen referendum that would introduce a bill in the legislature. In Florida, the only way to do a citizen referendum, meaning something that is put forth by voters and residents, is via a ballot initiative. So a ballot initiative in the state of Florida amends the Florida Constitution if it's successful. To get a ballot initiative on, you have to collect a bunch of petitions to get it onto the ballot itself, and then you need 60% of voters to say yes. So that's a supermajority of voters during a presidential election have to say yes in order for the ballot initiative to be approved. And basically, this is the only option for defending abortion in our state because of DeSantis. Republicans had a supermajority in the Florida legislature. It's just like impossible to use those routes at this point in time. So this is the option we have. This ballot initiative would explicitly protect abortion up to the point of fetus viability in the Florida Constitution, which was the standard for a long period of time prior to the nonsense that's been happening with the federal Supreme Court. And the ballot initiative says, no law shall prohibit, penalize, delay, or restrict abortion before viability or when necessary to protect the patient's health as determined by the patient's healthcare provider. This amendment does not change the legislature's constitutional authority to require parental notification, basically. And it's spearheaded by a coalition called Floridians Protecting Freedom. That coalition includes a variety of orgs that are native to Florida that are involved in reproductive rights and reproductive justice, including things like Planned Parenthood and Florida Rising. So the mission in front of us, in order to make this happen, we have to gather about 900,000 valid signatures. That's 8% of the total votes cast in the last presidential election in Florida. And those signatures must come from at least half of Florida's 28 congressional districts. So we can't just collect them only in Tallahassee, in Tampa, Orlando, and Miami-Dade. It has to represent at least half of the congressional districts across the state. So if this is something you care about, we will include links for this in the description, but you can go to floridiansprotectingfreedom.com to learn more about it. You can also go to flfree.link/petition. If you're a registered voter in Florida, please sign a petition and mail it in. Your action is necessary to protect bodily autonomy. You can also get involved and help us collect. Literally at me on Twitter, and I will plug you in if you're interested in this. And I want to be clear, this is feasible. This is not a pipe dream. In August 2022, Kansas voters rejected an effort to repeal their constitutional protections for abortion. In November 2022, California, Michigan, and Vermont inserted abortion rights into their state constitutions, while Kentucky and Montana voted against additional restrictions. If Kentucky and Montana can do it, y'all, Florida can do it. And this is a mass popular appeals to working people policy. In 2022, an FAU poll found that 67% of respondents believed abortion should be legal in all or most cases. So in some, let's fucking go. We can do this. We can protect abortion in the Florida Constitution.
Oh, and I'd like to mention that we will actually have a box here. You can sign the petition if you want to come by Cap City Video Lounge. That box will be here starting tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
Woo!
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Love it.
So for me, first off, I'm going to delay it until we have more facts. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about was our king, the one, the only, our greatest living American politician, Mr. George Santos. Goddamn, it's just getting better. A couple days ago, 13 indicted and in custody, and still lying his ass off. God, we love him. I think that there's the kind of lying that he does should just be made legal, because it's just so beautiful. I don't know. I like there's a poetry and a grace to the way he carries himself and just lies his ass off constantly. I love it.
It's very creative.
It's very creative. Have you seen that photo of him going, I think it's coming out of the courthouse after his arraignment, and it looks like it's from a still from a movie. It's so masterfully shot. It almost has kind of that like early 2000s, a little slightly overexposed vibe to it, but I mean, really a politician of our era, for our era, what we deserve.
I just want to say that I did see the photo, and it reminded me of a very specific movie poster, and it's the movie, am I going to be right? But I believe the Al Pacino Phil Spector movie has the poster for it was like the exact same. I'm trying to pull it up. Yeah, it's like that. So today we're going to talk about John Carpenter's They Live, famously starring WWE and wrestling great Roddy Piper. So before we get into They Live, our top 3 this week is going to be top 3 performances from wrestlers in movies or cameos. I'm going to specify just because I went specifically cameos with mine, like 5 minutes or less screen time performances, where I know that you picked some that were a bit more star players.
Yes, all 3 of mine.
Hell yeah.
Well, it just went all over the place, honestly. Yeah. Grab back.
Well, Hal, let's start with your number 3.
Okay, so I will say before I say my number 3, I have 2 things I want to say. One, I got to give an honorable mention to my boy, the body, the mind, Jesse Ventura in Predator. I didn't feel like the role was meaty enough to compete with the other 3 that I listed, which are all starring roles, but I love the motherfucker, and he constantly is talking sense, which I love. A lot of wrestlers, especially later in their lives, are just fucking, MAGA brain melting out of their heads, CTE, fucked up weirdos, and he is not. So I want to say him. And then
Never heard him on InfoWars.
I have. Yes. Like I said, he's in his fully the mind era. He's no longer the body.
Unironically, like the best guest on InfoWars, because he has enough clout that Alex Jones will not be a dick to him, but he also will push back against Alex Jones. And they're the funniest interviews where, like, because most times, like, if Alex Jones knows he can knock somebody around, he'll just be like, you dumbass, or whatever. But he, like, respects Jesse Ventura too much, so he won't push on him. And then Jesse Ventura will, Alex, I think you're wrong about that. And they're great. I love them.
Well, that's because he knows Jesse Ventura will beat his ass.
That's a fact.
Like, the other thing I'll say, this is not a performance that has happened yet, but I make this list hoping, praying, wishing, fiending that I can throw it all out and move my king. He's better than you, and you know it. MJF. After The Iron Claw, which is a movie that Sean Durkin, the guy who directed Marcy May Marlene, and recently directed and exec produced the Amazon Dead Ringer series, which I do recommend. It's really not the movie at all, but it's worth watching regardless. Film about the Von Erich family, which is a dynasty of wrestlers. It's supposed to come out later this year in 2023. It's produced by A24. It also stars Zac Efron, Lily James, Jeremy Allen White. But I will be there to see Salt of the Earth, my favorite wrestler, my favorite current wrestler, Maxwell Jacob Friedman. And also, viewer or listener, you can't see this because you're not a viewer, but I did put pictures of him in the script for my fellow discussants to see. If you would like to look at who this is, because you probably don't know if you don't watch AEW wrestling, including a very sexy dog collar match that he had with CM Punk, known to maybe more people, which I saw in person at AEW Revolution in Orlando last year. So hopefully MJF will be at the top of that list. But right now, I will say my number 3 is, as featured in this film, Rowdy Piper. I think we'll talk, I'm not going to linger on this too long because obviously we're going to talk about a lot in a few minutes, but I think there's a really perfect harmony of fight choreography skills and line delivery specifically meeting the needs of the film. I think a lot of wrestlers struggle to get out of the particular mode that wrestling promo cutting requires, and that is exactly what this movie needs from him. He understood the assignment. He did what needed to be done. He fits like a hook into an eye, and I love him for it. How about you, Kevin? What's your third?
Third on my list, I was going to mention Tor Johnson from Plan 9 from Outer Space. Oh. And Bride of the Monster. I'm kind of going for dark horse picks. But, you know, I feel like his lack of acting ability definitely enhanced his performances in Ed Dewood Jr.'s finest hours. So, yeah, Tor Johnson. Larger than life, not much of line delivery. Probably my favorite line of his is from The Unearthly, Time to Go to Bed. Fantastic.
Hell yeah.
I felt it in my heart. And, yeah, he's just a behemoth of classic trash cinema. So.
Hell yeah.
So much of his acting in that movie is the making of the face,
no
which
doubt.
Again is a classic, like a directly transferable skill for wrestling, because so much of wrestling is selling, is being able to perform injury, you know, to the audience. And oftentimes when that was, you know, when it's on television is very tightly cropped, zoomed in on people's faces.
Absolutely.
So again, we love to see wrestlers being used for their like natural cultivated ability instead of trying to jam them in a round peg into a square hole. Or inverse. I guess you can put a round peg into a square hole.
Sure.
Maybe.
You can. You can.
Right.
If you try hard enough.
Anything is fit if you try hard enough.
So I'm slightly less versed with wrestlers and their performances in film. So I went with cameos, as I said, and specifically ones that I remember really well or that left an impact on me. And one is, because I just like this scene, is Tom Tiny Lister from In the Dark Knight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he has like one scene, and it's at the end when they're like leaving Gotham, and they've put all the prisoners on one boat and all the like citizens of Gotham on the other, and the Joker has said, I think I don't remember, but I think the setup is that you think the bomb has been put on the citizen boat.
It's like,
or it has been put on the citizen boat.
Each boat has a bomb and like the receiver to detonate.
Yeah.
So the prisoners have a detonator, and then the civilized civilians.
And like
boat.
one of the prison guards, and one of the prison guards is like debating whether to detonate the other one so they will live. And then Tiny Lister comes in and grabs it from him, and you're like, oh shit, he's gonna detonate it. And then he like crushes it and chucks it out the window. Which is just a nice scene. And also, it's like one of the only times in any Batman movie where criminals aren't like just thugs or whatever and like are allowed to have humanity. And it's just a nice little moment. Hal, what about you? What's your number 2?
My number 2 is John Cena in Blockers.
Hell yeah.
Or Cock Blockers, right? I saw this movie alone at an 11 a.m., which is the earliest screening at the AMC in Tallahassee. It came out, if you don't know or don't recall, in spring 2018. I did not have a full-time job at the time. I had just left the PhD program and I was in, and I was working 2 part-time jobs. So I was like, I can go to the movies during the day, which I really desperately miss. And I laughed so fucking hard in one particular scene that I got soda up my nose and started choking so aggressively hard that an old man who was a few rows away and was one of the only other people in the theater got up and walked over to me and asked me if I was okay. So it was the scene of him like trying to butt chug outside of a party where the cops are showing up. I was dying. My favorite thing about John Cena's performance in that movie is frankly the opposite. It's what I don't like about The Rock, which is that The Rock cannot allow himself to be perceived as anything other than the Ubermensch. Like, he cannot be humble, and he cannot like make fun of himself. And John Cena was absolutely inverting expectations for him. I also want to give a shout out to his performance as Peacemaker. I didn't include it. It's not a movie. Well, he's in the Suicide Squad, I guess, but I think his best performance in that role is in the series and maybe not the movie. But he is a strategist. He has engineered the career that he wants to have. This motherfucker learned Mandarin in order to be competitive in the largest growing film market, intentionally.
Really?
Yes.
Holy smokes, I didn't know that.
Yes. He is like wicked, smart, and intentional, and I respect him for it. So, Kevin, how about you? What's your number 2?
All right, keeping it going with the weird stuff. My number 2
Always.
would be Ox Baker from Escape from New York, another John Carpenter classic.
Hell yeah.
And if you watch that scene, like Ox Baker, God, the guy's like almost 8 feet tall. He's just a behemoth. He's this gigantic dude, immense, and he's in the ring with Snake Plissken. And I remember on the commentary track, Kurt Russell's like, you know why this looks so convincing? Because this guy didn't, you cannot tell him, like, oh, like, pull your punches. No, he was coming after Kurt Russell with a baseball bat filled with nails. So Kurt is literally, like, terrified for his life. And so I feel like it's a very rad performance. And, I mean, I don't think there's much acting involved at all. He's just kind of walking around beating the crap out of Kurt Russell. And it looks fantastic.
Hell yeah.
Damn good job. And I got to mention this. When he gets, spoiler alert for a movie from 1981.
He escapes from New York.
Well, yep, that's it. Ox Baker, he dies by a baseball bat. That baseball bat filled with nails. He gets hit in the back of the head. And for them to accomplish that without cutting, they put a 2x4 against the back of his head. And Kurt Russell is actually hitting that 2x4 attached to the back of Ox's head with an actual baseball bat filled with nails. So think about that the next time you watch.
Jesus.
That is a performance. So put your life on the line.
Oh my God.
For a John Carpenter movie.
I'm also looking up pictures of Ox Baker right now, and these eyebrows are just out of control, and the facial hair. But
very
these sculpted eyebrows. Yeah. Oh yeah, it is Divine-esque. The eyebrows. Yeah,
very sculpted.
Oh, love him. All right, my number 2 is another brief cameo, but it's Macho Man Randy Savage as Bonesaw McGraw in the first Spider-Man film. Well, the first one, right? The first feature? Yeah. The Sam Raimi one. This is your
number 2 pick is Macho Man?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
My number 1 is kind of cheating because it's a bunch of people.
Okay.
But yeah, I love just that first silly scene. I don't know. It's like fun and feels like a comic book. And I went and rewatched it for this, and it made me realize like Marvel movies and comic book movies aren't like this anymore. And it's kind of a bummer that like you said, like The Rock has no room to be like silly. Like I feel like Marvel movies are like that now too. It's like there's no room for silliness. Like as much as we shit on the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 3 where like he does the emo dance and all that, like that was I just mean the culture shits on Spider-Man 3, which I don't like it that much, but like a dance sequence in the middle of a Marvel movie now, it would be ridiculous. Like at least that kind of dance sequence that is kind
dance
of
sequences in Spider-Man 3. I really like the kitchen one with James Franco and Kirsten. It's like, don't do that because we're here, guys. Just make your omelet, all right?
I'm specifically talking about the one where he the emo where he's got his hair and he's doing the That's
why I go to the movies,
right?
You know?
Like those are super fun moments, and I think Sam Raimi is his like flourishes are very much missed in like the modern landscape of shitty Marvel comic book movies.
I just want to say something about Bonesaw that's not really related to movies at all, which is that there is a Magic the Gathering card called Bonesaw that every time it is in a format, it gets reprinted semi-frequently, every time I play it in like a draft format, I would just say like, Bonesaw!
Got you for 3 minutes
every time. Bonesaw! So... you know, iconic. And I think this is great because, I mean, Macho Man Randy Savage's his story is depressing, especially, well, honestly, throughout. I mean, he was a domestic abuser and was it struggled with substance use, and I mean, frankly, a lot of wrestlers of that era. It's a very similar story, but that is a movie that was made and came out pretty late into his career. And so I appreciate for that too, of kind of just recording him in a way that is very authentically Macho Man, forever. You know, we get that forever. We get Bonesaw forever.
Absolutely.
I will say I'm more of a fan of his performances in the old Slim Jim commercials.
Yes.
Oh yeah, classic.
Hell yeah. Hal, what about you? What's your number one wrestler in movies?
Number one, last thing I'm watching real quick. There is a 70s Disney disco album of covers that are Disney-fied of a bunch of like popular disco songs of the era. And there's a song on it called Macho Duck. That is Macho Man, but it's Donald Duck singing it.
Oh my God,
and my husband listens to this album like as if it's real music, like just
unironically, just
fully unironically, like actually listens to it. And I have tried to convince him for years to go as Macho Duck with me, where we dress like ducks and Randy Savage.
Oh, please, that has to happen.
Right? Okay, thank you. Yes.
Wrestlers doing songs. Have you guys heard the Hulk Hogan Hulkster's Gone to Heaven?
Yes.
God damn, that is a brilliant. If no one's ever heard of it, okay, let me make sure I get the story right. He is writing this song for a fan of his that is a little boy who has passed away from disease, and Hulk sings him a song about how they're gonna wrestle in heaven one day, and it is Hulk Hogan singing in it. Yo, Hulkster's gone to heaven. It is a mess. I'm sorry, what's your number one?
Yeah, it's hard to mimic steroid abuse on your vocal cords. So for my number one, there's some recency bias here, I will admit. We'll see what this looks like over time, but for me right now, I gotta say Batista in Knock at the Cabin Door. Something that often comes up with wrestlers, and you definitely see this with The Rock, about like the wrestling physique and physicality being a barrier to other roles, but not for Big Dave. This role is so tender. It's so sweet. It's so affected, and I mean that in a good way, not with negative connotations. And he does that while being huge. It's good? We're good. Okay. I'll give him kind of a secondary award. It's a much smaller role, but a secondary award for him holding down the opening scene of Blade Runner 2049.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
In his tiny glasses, tiny glasses, big head. I love it. And I firmly believe I would bet money on this if someone wanted to take my money and give me a good betting line, that he will be the first professional wrestler to not only be nominated, but win an Oscar. I project Best Supporting.
Wow. I'd like to see that happen. Yeah.
David Arquette would be my guess. He's going to get a prestige offer at some point.
Have you seen the David Arquette documentary?
Yes. You can't kill
You
David
cannot
Arquette?
kill David Arquette.
Yeah.
It's very good, and I highly recommend it, and especially if you're interested in learning about... He's such a unique figure because he truly is someone that ended up stranded on the boundaries of two different worlds that neither really wanted him. But I will say there is kind of a happy ending to the story, both in terms of his mental health and where things end up there. But also, he's friends with a ton of wrestlers. He shows up on a lot of, contemporarily, shows up in a lot of backstage stuff with AEW, a lot of the YouTube shows and vlogging and all the stuff that a lot of those guys do. So he's still out there, living his little wrestling dream, just in a different way. So he won a WCW title belt around the movie
Ready to Rumble?
Yes. And that is what made everyone in wrestling fucking hate him, because he won a title belt. And that was at a time where kayfabe was still sacred in some form. And so wrestling, like any tight-knit community, has really strong feelings about paying your dues and not skipping the line and all of that kind of shit. But on top of that, it was viewed as a threat to kayfabe because it's not believable at all that skinny motherfucker was I can't remember who he beat, but...
Well, technically he was passed out at the time. He was knocked out.
Yes.
So he just dropped him on top of him. So it's not like he really earned it.
Major heat. He got major decades worth of heat. But you should seriously watch this documentary because there's all kinds of crazy shit. He like almost died in a death match with this guy Nick Gage, who I like a lot. It was a really interesting story, and like was serving time in prison for trying to rob a bank. We could go deep into the indie wrestling lore. Nick Gage, yes, he primarily, not exclusively, but primarily wrestles with GCW, which I brought up before. Is Game Changer Wrestling is one of the biggest indie promotions in the United States. But yeah, David Arquette, super interesting figure, right on the boundaries of wrestling and cinema.
Hell yeah. Well, Kevin, what about you? What's your number one favorite performance from a wrestler in a movie?
My number one is a callback to another person we've actually already mentioned. And it's not a movie, it's a TV show.
Okay.
It's Jesse Ventura on The X-Files in the episode Jose Chung's From Outer Space, where he plays a man in black, along with the late, great Alex Trebek. And it's my absolute favorite episode of The X-Files. And he just drops some of the greatest dialogue about, you think you saw a UFO? It might be the planet Venus. Have you ever thought of that? You so brazenly declared. Absolutely magnificent little role of his.
I've never seen that one.
He just about steals the show. It's
what season, what era of X-Files are we talking?
I want to say. It's
season
like
3, okay.
Yeah, it's the same guy. Oh my gosh. He wrote Small Potatoes, and he played the Fluke Man in that episode where there's a monster in the pooper.
I don't know.
You remember the pooper one? No?
The pooper one?
Yeah.
The one with the pooper?
The giant fluke monster. His mouth
So
looks
I'm
like
not-
an anus, and he's in the porta potty.
I'm not a X-Files completionist. I have not seen it all. I
Highly
need to.
recommend it. It's
Yeah,
all
I need to.
Season 2, episode 2.
Hell yeah. Wait, the pooper,
Poop monster.
poop monster? I feel
He's
like I've
not
seen
made
all
poop.
of
He's
seasons
like a
1 and
fluke
2.
monster mutation.
Well, if he's not made of poop, then I'm not watching.
I understand completely.
Wait, wasn't there a Kevin Smith movie that had a poop monster
Dogma.
in it? Dogma has a whole
strip club. Poop monster comes out.
a whole poop monster. All right, well, my number one performance from a wrestler in a movie is actually a bunch of wrestlers in a movie. And again, I'm going cameos. But have y'all seen MacGruber?
Oh yeah.
I love MacGruber quite a bit. It is extremely stupid. Yes, if you tell me I'm an idiot for liking MacGruber, then I would say yes, of course, that is why I enjoy MacGruber. But the reason it's my number one wrestler cameo film is because it doesn't have just one wrestler cameo. It has a bunch, and it's a very funny cameo. Do you remember what happens to these wrestlers in this cameo?
I refresh my memory.
So the wrestlers are, and like these are like A-team wrestlers. So like the wrestlers are, and their names in MacGruber are really funny. So we've got the Big Show as Brick Hughes, Kane as Tanker Lutz, the Great Khali as Tug Phelps, MVP as Vernon Freedom, Mark Henry as Tut Beamer, and Chris Jericho as Frank Corver. And they're all like meant to be kind of like 80s style like commando action heroes. And it's at the beginning of the movie where like MacGruber's having to answer to his higher ups. They'll be like, "How are you going to get this done, MacGruber?" And he's like, "I've assembled a team of all-stars." And then I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think he realizes like he gassed the helicopter up wrong, or the truck that they were on, and like right when he says like, "These guys will take down anybody," like it explodes and he has to assemble Val Kilmer and whoever else was in that movie. Ryan
Phillippe?
Phillippe, yeah.
I know he did last summer. Yeah.
Yeah, goddamn, that movie was fun. And then he put celery up his butt.
Wow.
What's not to love? What is not to love?
That's magic.
Okay, so on to the movie discussion.
Hey, this is Craig from the editing room floor. Unfortunately, we had some audio issues and had to kind of split up our record days. See if you can find the hidden edits. They're pretty obvious because I'm not experienced with audio equipment. Anyways,
unfortunately, Hal had to go out of town. We had just couldn't make it work. And so you're going to hear Hal kind of fade out a little bit because Kevin and I had to do part of the episode alone without Hal. Hal will be back on the next one, fear not. But yeah, sorry about the audio issues, and we'll get right back to it.
Let's talk a little bit about Reaganomics. And let's start way before Ronald Reagan, and that is after World War II. The U.S. had initiated the Bretton Woods system, an economic idea meant to stabilize the economies of global powers and prevent the economic failures that contributed to both world wars. The Bretton Woods system, agreed upon by 44 of the Allied nations, it required countries to guarantee convertibility of their currencies into U.S. dollar within 1% of fixed parity rates. The idea was to create a new international system of economic security that would prevent competitive devaluation and usher in a new era of global economic stability.
So basically, in the wake of World War II, the organizing feature of international financial institutions was tying everything to the United States dollar. The U.S. said, we are that bitch, and you will follow us. We're not going to fully dive into this right now, but I think it's important for us to talk about, both because it provides context for Reaganomics, but also because it's a little bit of foreshadowing, an amuse-bouche on neo-imperialist douches, for future episodes / maybe a series on films that depict and make real these massive globe-spanning phenomena of neo-imperialism, development, entities like the World Bank and the IMF, structural adjustment policies. Y'all just wait till I get going on that later. Woo! Watch out. And domination through debt. Kind of in the seething ashes of a post-colonial world. Obviously, I'm being like a little reductive. Kenya, for example, wasn't free until 1963. But the point is that a reorganization of the world was happening. The colonial center was threatened and reorienting. So Bretton Woods was a marker of impending neoliberal transformation. The goal was stability that serves the U.S., / Western / global North trade needs.
And it worked for a little bit. After World War II, the U.S. economy boomed for a few decades. A robust middle class arose, in part because of the success of the GI Bill, which created an educated workforce and strengthened labor unions, and an explosion of manufacturing led to high employment and a booming economy. However, by the 1970s, manufacturing productivity slowed, and by 1973, the U.S. had entered a period of stagflation, where the inflation rate increased, as did unemployment, while economic demands went stagnant. This created a recession. And in addition, the Bretton Woods system, meant to guarantee worldwide economic stability, had crashed and the value of the US dollar had plummeted.
And I'll note here, and it connects to our previous episode on Platoon, that during this time, the US was dumping tons of money into the Vietnam War. And wars always increase commodity prices and exacerbate inflation.
And it was during this time of exacerbated inflation and war that in the late 70s, a group of cretinous businessmen and vampires hatched a plan. See, for the last half century, the U.S. had operated under a Keynesian economic theory, which called for government intervention to create policies that would directly influence the economy, including a significantly more robust welfare state. However, another economist was lurking in the shadows, Milton Friedman. Friedman's ideas, associated with the University of Chicago's economics department, outlined that the supply of money itself must be controlled. To boil it down entirely too simply, Keynesian economics saw government spending as an essential intervention tool to regulate the economy, while Friedman in the Chicago school saw controlling the money supply, i.e. limiting inflation regardless of human costs, as the way to control the economy. And how did the aforementioned band of cretins and vampires seek to control the money supply? Government deregulation and unfettered capitalism. Ronald Reagan and the ghouls who replaced his batteries and kept his portholes clean ushered in a new era of government deregulation, slicing tax rates and deregulating industries like banking and natural gas, all while loosening restrictions that allow privatization and emphasize profitability, despite disastrous future implications, like relaxing interpretations of the Clean Air Act and opening up large swaths of public land to the highest bidder, usually oil companies or other destructive monopolies.
At the same time, the Reagan administration dismantled the anti-poverty initiatives of LBJ's The Great Society. Last week we talked about LBJ fucking sucks and he was a war hawk, but he did have some good welfare state policies that were grouped together and called The Great Society. There's a professor emeritus of sociology at FSU whose name is Jill Quidagno, whose work I highly recommend. She has a really brilliant book called The Color of Welfare that's about the policy realignment in the early 80s. It situates it mostly on racism, which is not exactly what I'm going to talk about here. But here's a little rundown. I recommend if you're interested in that. But here's a little rundown on the actual policy change that we saw during the Reagan administration. So in 1981, in the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, Congress eliminated the entire public service jobs program. So it did this by collapsing the Federal Office of Economic Opportunity under HHS, Health and Human Services. And by extension, it ended all federal funding for CAPS, which stands for Community Action Programs, which were localized anti-poverty initiatives that varied. They ranged from legal aid, birth control clinics, theater and arts program, educational programs, but also more radical programming that organized the poor, like our old boogeyman Saul Alinsky's program. In the same bill, they removed 400,000 people from food stamps. They got rid of a minimum benefit limit for low-income earners in Social Security. They got rid of death benefits for most recipients of Social Security, and they phased out benefits for older kids of deceased workers. They removed aid to families with dependent children called AFDC. Now it's called TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families. But if most of the time when people think of welfare, like the idea of cash transfusions from the government to people, this is what they're talking about. They removed entirely eligibility for youth aged 18 to 20 in the same fell swoop. And Congress also gave states authority to design and implement their own welfare to work program. So I've talked a little bit on the pod before about workfare, or the idea that you have to hit certain benchmarks of qualify for state supports. And this idea was introduced by Reagan.
And all the while, Ronald Reagan launched a series of disastrous moral initiatives like the war on drugs, which cost roughly $100 billion a year and exploded the prison population, all while dumping obscene amounts of money into the U.S. military during the height of Cold War paranoia. Simultaneously, Reagan took aim at unions. In 1981, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, or PATCO, went on strike for higher pay and shorter hours. Reagan called the strike a peril to national safety and demanded striking workers return to work. Eventually, the Reagan administration fired over 11,000 air traffic control workers. This decision reverberated throughout the U.S. workforce, emboldening private employers to stand up against striking workers rather than negotiate labor conflicts. Naturally, the once robust middle class began to shrink and the gap between rich and poor widened. But Reagan was not deterred, for those at the bottom end of the economic divide were simply not rich yet. Reaganomics kept the middle class docile with the idea of trickle-down economics, meaning cutting taxes for the rich and reducing regulations on business would result in more money in the economy, which would ultimately trickle down to those at the bottom. And Reaganomics saw an early economic boom in the 80s. However, it took only a few years to see that Reaganomics just wasn't working for the working class. By 1988, industrial jobs were drying up, unions and labor movements were neutered, prison population was increasing while average household income decreased, and benefit programs had withered. Enter John Carpenter's They Live.
Kevin, They Live has quite a strong presence inside Cap City Video Lounge. There is an alien head that is right at the door when you come in. I'm always interested in this because I usually have a pretty good memory for the first time I see things, but I do not have a memory at all of the first time I saw They Live. Do you have a specific first time seeing They Live memory?
Actually, yeah, I do. I remember renting it from Video 21, and it was it's a weird time in my life. Let me tell you, when I was like a young teenager, like John Carpenter, I felt was kind of a joke in a way. Like I didn't quite get his stuff.
Yeah.
So I remember renting They Live, and I was like, oh, this is going to be just a goofy, sort of stupid sci-fi thing. My friends and I were watching, and sure, we were like kind of laughing at first, but the laughs dissipated very quickly, and I was like, wait a minute. There's a lot more going on in this movie than I was expecting, and I feel like that's kind of the nature of John Carpenter films for me. Like at first I was like, whatever. But over time, like as I've gotten older, every time I watch him, I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah, and I feel like They Live is his most like whimsical and like could kind of lean into the like silly camp, but never does.
No doubt, yeah. And even like the silliest stuff in that movie, like when you break it down, what is he trying to say with this?
Yeah, I do remember being scared by the They Live box at like the movie theater.
Right.
Did you have that? Because I grew up like in a religious church where like, hey, my parents were like strict about stuff, but not that strict. But I remember like no R-rated movies for like until I was like 16.
Right.
And so that was like there was a whole host of like, and I was a little rule follower, so I mostly stuck to that. But I remember a whole host of movies like boxes at the movie store that freaked me out, and I remember They Live being one of them. Just specifically the glasses, the close-up poster of the glasses like that.
Totally.
Now I'm trying to think, what are some other ones that really like just the box art I had just a visceral memory of being creeped out by.
Oh, good God. I remember I have vivid recollections of, because like you, like I wasn't allowed to watch horror movies. It wasn't even a religious household. It's just like, if it's R-rated, you can't watch it. And I think it was the primary fear of the bare female breasts that my mom had. She's like, you can't watch this.
Terrifying.
Yeah, I know, right? So I remember sitting in the aisles of the video store and just looking at VHS cases and looking at the back and imagining what these scenarios were. And like I remember specifically the Friday the 13th Part 7 box set, the VHS box for Part 7, and Jason just like grabbing one of the characters by the shoulder. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, Jesus
and just
Christ.
like my imagination made things that were so much more horrifying. When I finally watched it, I was laughing my ass off.
Yeah.
But looking at the case as a child, it's like, oh, this scenario is terrifying.
One of the ones that scared me, and I always remember, and I still never seen this movie, is April Fool's Day.
Yeah,
I don't know why it freaked me out, but like, if I remember the box, like her hair is tied into like a noose, and she's holding a knife behind her back, and I always remember seeing that in the movie at the store and being freaked out by it, and still never saw it. So, good job, Mom and Dad. It worked. So, let us talk about They Live. John Carpenter had said that he wanted to make an allegory for the horrors of Reaganomics. His quote was, "By the late 80s, I'd had enough." This was to the LA Times. And he said, "I decided to make a statement, as stupid and banal as it is, but I made one, and that's They Live. I just loved that it was giving the finger to Reagan when nobody else would." So we've already kind of talked about your first time with it. Do we like this movie? I'm assuming that we do.
Oh my gosh, They Live has aged
really
horrifyingly well. Yeah, it's one of those things. I love how John Carpenter
scary how like
undersells himself.
Still it is, yeah.
He legit made one of the most important films of the 1980s, and one that just continues to reverberate to this day. Like, you look at people who are in charge now, you look at our governor, and holy shit, man.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare.
It is. And so where does They Live rank in your John rankingtons?
Man. Let me tell you, my John Carpenter list is constantly in flux, just like my favorite films. It's like it always depends on where I'm at and what I'm doing. But They Live, I feel, has a constant place in my top 3 of John Carpenter's filmography. It's just such a fantastic film, and it's colorful and terrifying. You can laugh with it. It's also anything that gives a middle finger to authority. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of John Carpenter's MO. Like, you look at his films, and that's kind of what they're all about. So,
and in a not like, because sometimes that could be kind of, I feel maybe talking down to you a little bit, like when the satire is too on the nose. And I think he is always like hella poignant, like.
Absolutely.
Like on target, but it never feels like do you like Adam McKay's movies?
Oh my gosh, what he did, like Vice
and the one, the Don't Look Up, which like I think it has a little bit of that I fucking hated Don't Look Up, and I really didn't like Vice, and like it's all stuff that like aligns with like mostly what I believe about those topics in general, but they're so goddamn like smug and
But they always
preachy.
always have that scene where they're like an aside, just so you understand what we're talking about.
Which I feel is like kind of a cop out because they're like trying to be like, listen, we know we're being a little like preachy about this shit, so like let me break the fourth wall to like address that fact. But yeah, They Live doesn't feel like that at all. So They Live, it is stars WWE Hall of Famer Roddy Piper, and we will definitely talk about his performance some more. He plays Nada, this kind of everyman who is very much a victim of Reaganomics. He's this unattached drifter who has hitchhiked to Los Angeles in search of work after losing a job in Denver where he had worked for 10 plus years. And he finds himself with a job as a construction worker, living in this kind of shanty town amongst other displaced laborers and homeless workers and like low-level do-gooders, and all trying to navigate life in one of the many like economic ghettos that was created by Reaganomics. First off, what do we think of like Nada as a character outside of Roddy Piper's performance, which is like so physical? I really like this kind of like blank canvas of a character, like the drifter that wanders in, and you can kind of make him like mold him to the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it's weird to say this, but you look at the first quarter of that film, and it's a really subtle performance and a very impressive one, in my personal opinion, from Roddy Piper, of the drifter who comes into town. He's quiet, he's trying his best. It's very, you can't help but empathize with this guy, and you feel so bad for him. Like the part where he tries to connect with the woman, he's trying to find work. She just keeps rolling her eyes, and he's like, all the work dried up. Oh, I've heard this before.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, so already like the horror is right there in the forefront.
And he has like, it is a really good performance because he has that kind of like mysteriousness to him that like it reminds me of Paris, Texas, the kind of just like
absolutely
the same like Harry Dean Stanton, like just kind of like wanderer who like there isn't a lot of detail, but like all the detail is like kind of worn in his like physicality and expression and all that.
Yep, you can see it on his face.
But yeah, so Nada, which John Carpenter I think has also pointed out means nothing in Spanish, so I think kind of like, I think his name is John, is his first name?
Yeah,
John Nada, so just kind of like John Nothing, John Everyman, John, so while he kind of finds some work like at this construction company, and amongst several characters, one of which is this guy he kind of becomes friends with named Frank, played by the great just completely blanked on his name.
Keith David. Yeah,
I've written it down in my notes like 17 times. He's so good in this movie too. So they kind of work across the street from this African American Methodist church that where like that come and go with transient workers and laborers, and there specifically like some stuff's going down with like news stations being hacked and kind of sketchy characters. So he's got his kind of radar up around this church, and a few days later they're raided by police, and we are kind of getting this obvious statement early on about how police are kind of an instrument to capitalism itself.
Yes.
And I think that is something that is explored throughout the movie, because he does say that I don't remember the exact line, maybe you remember it, but that most of the cops aren't aliens, like they're just pliable, like they can just go along with it. Which is again a really prescient like thing from They Live, that it is multiple times making like just a out and out statement that the police are for the elite wealthy class and not the lower class.
Who they're protecting.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to read something from an article in These Times written by a guy named Sam Mitrani. He wrote an article called "The Police Were Created to Control Working Class and Poor People, Not Serve and Protect." And Kevin, if you'll entertain me, I want to read just a little bit from what he wrote, because I think it really captures the idea that I think is understated in They Live, that the police have always existed to serve private property rights. And policing, we'll talk about it in a second, but policing as we know it really kind of came up amongst slavery as a way to enforce, slave fugitive laws and things like that. But this is what Sam Mitrani wrote for In These Times. The police were not created to protect and serve the population. They were not created to stop crime, at least not as most people understand it. They were created to protect the new form of wage labor capitalism that emerged in the mid to late 19th century from the threat posed by that system's offspring, the working class. Before the 19th century, there were no police forces that we would recognize as such anywhere in the world. In the northern United States, there was a system of elected constables and sheriffs, much more responsible to the population in a very direct way than the police are today. In the South, the closest thing to a police force was the slave patrols. Then, as northern cities grew and filled with mostly immigrant wage workers who were physically and socially separated from the ruling class, the wealthy elite who ran the various municipal governments hired hundreds and then thousands of armed men to impose order on the new working class neighborhoods. Of course, the ruling class did not get everything it wanted and had to yield on many points to the immigrant workers it sought to control. This is why, for instance, municipal governments backed away from trying to stop Sunday drinking and why they hired so many immigrant police officers, especially the Irish. But despite these concessions, businessmen organized themselves to make sure the police were increasingly isolated from democratic control and established their own hierarchies, systems of governance, and rules of behavior. The police increasingly set themselves off from the populations by donning uniforms, establishing their own rules for hiring, promoting, and firing, working to build a unique esprit de corps, and identifying themselves with order. And despite complaints about corruption and inefficiency, they gained more and more support from the ruling class to the extent that in Chicago, for instance, businessmen donated money to buy the police rifles, artillery, Gatling guns, buildings, and money to establish a police pension out of their own pockets. So it's been extensively written on that, the police are not here to serve and protect, but to kind of serve as an arm of the kind of capitalist system. And I love John Carpenter's pretty subtle commentary, but pretty obvious in They Live.
It's one of my favorite touches after the raid of Justiceville, the homeless town. After they crush it, they demolish everything. They run everything out. They're just bulldozing, and eventually it's left as a wasteland where it was once a little town. Everybody's got their tents, everybody's taking care of one another. That's gone, but what's left? A functioning television set. It's still there.
Yeah. The one
thing they had to leave there.
So after the raid at the church, Nada discovers that this church has been amassing these black sunglasses that, when worn, they reveal subliminal messages encouraging Americans to obey and consume and conform. And furthermore, the glasses reveal that a large number of average Americans are, in fact, aliens, posing as humans in an effort to turn planet Earth into mindless consumers who won't question when the very fabric of their life is stripped away by otherworldly entities. I love the makeup, design of these things. It's unsettling and kind of not quite realistic, but not a mask either. It's this weird uncanny valley.
I was just about to say, it's very unsettling, man.
Yeah. I find myself kind of getting lost in the weird designs of the starry eyes and it is unsettling, I think, is the perfect word.
It's almost like a death's head of sort, because it's very skull-like. It's almost Grim Reaper-esque, but with
just sinew and gross stuff kind of draped onto it. It's great. I love it.
And I love the line one of the aliens says to their audience, you look just as shitty to us as we do to you. Impossible.
Yeah. So good. Yeah, he has got obviously a lot of great line readings in here.
Yeah.
But obviously John Carpenter, where are we putting this in the John Carpenter makeup ranks? I know what my number one is, and I feel like
you're talking about The Thing?
The Thing, yeah.
Of course. But as far as an iconic creature
design,
oh my gosh, They Live, it pops up all over the place. That thing really has kind of gotten a life of its own.
And John Carpenter always I feel, even in some of his crappier ones, he commits to a makeup design that's effective. I just watched Ghosts of Mars, one of the later John Carpenter ones, and it's not great, but it's a lot of fun. But the makeup design on it is cool as hell. I don't know how Martian it is, but it's cool. So, we did mention him already, but I do want to keep track of this as we do more episodes of this podcast, our kind of actors and actresses Hall of Fame on the Red Rose Film Club, because we've had 2 Willem Dafoe films, Florida Project and Platoon, and now we've had 2 appearances by Keith David, Platoon, and this.
Very nice.
But yeah, I love Keith David. He plays this character named Frank Armitage. He's this kind of fellow construction worker and Nada's only real human connection, who he quickly gets wrapped up in this discovery of these sunglasses. And while Nada is kind of mysterious and you can kind of imprint a lot of like what you bring to the movie onto him, Frank is very specific. He is also a displaced worker who's trying to earn enough money, but we know he has a wife and children and Detroit that he's trying to get back to. And if Nada is this kind of mythologized versions of Americans left in the dust by Reaganomics, Frank feels more authentic and like extremely realized and vulnerable and kind of like the heart of the movie too. And I do think making him have more of a solidified story also is a nice subtle way that Carpenter is also telling us how, you know, Reaganomics were extremely racialized. We can see the white everyman who we can kind of imprint on, but we can see the damage Reaganomics done to Frank, and I think Keith David brings like a lot of that emotional weight to it.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, man.
But what's your favorite Keith David performance?
Ooh, besides They Live,
I love favorites. If you find me on Letterboxd, I got like hella fave lists.
So, and of course, you got to go back to his first film credit, The Thing. I mean, the guy's just exceptional in that movie.
Yeah. How many Carpenter movies has he been in?
I think
those two?
only the two.
Is he in
weirdly.
Assault on?
No.
Okay.
His very first screen credit was John Carpenter's
Oh, it
The Thing.
was? Okay.
And it's so funny because he didn't work in a movie again until he got hired for They Live. He's primarily a stage actor.
Yeah.
But I liked his bit in Nope. I remember seeing in the ads for I saw him in the background. I was like, oh, Keith David's in this?
Yeah.
No, but not for long.
For too long.
But it was cool seeing him. I thought he did great work as the voice of Spawn on the HBO series. I mean, the man's got an incredible voice.
Yeah, really good voice.
So all the voice work he's done, I thought, has been just through the roof.
He's also the performance I always remember from him because it is very unsettling, and he has a very he can have a very malevolent presence.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think he does it all in They Live, but. And it's a movie I don't even like that much, but Requiem for a Dream.
Oh, God, that was on my list.
Yeah. I don't love that movie, but his, like, the scene that he's in could, like, very quickly be kind of gross and exploitative with a different actor doing what he's doing, but, like, he brings such a, like, malevolence and weight to it that it, like, really stands out and feels shocking, which I think it's supposed to. But, and I think a lot of that is because he's, like, so, like, creepy in a very I was gonna say understated, but it's pretty overstated in that movie.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so we got Keith David, Rowdy Piper. It's happening. We are in the movie. We get to probably the centerpiece of the movie, the thing that gets talked about the most, which is the back alley fight scene when Rowdy Piper is trying to force Frank to put on these glasses and so he can see the world for how it really is. I have to imagine we love this fight scene.
Oh, one of the greatest fights in cinema history.
It's so
for
good.
Sure.
Yeah. And are you like, I know we've talked wrestling a little bit. Are you a wrestling guy?
You know, I wasn't for a long time. I've recently gotten back into it, like the athleticism of it, the spectacle. It's really impressive. I know everybody gets hung up on it's fake, it's scripted. Well, no shit, but who cares? It's so much fun and it's so well done.
That's a boomer thing. I swear to God. Like, I think boomers are obsessed with pointing out that wrestling is fake because I think they got tricked for so long. Like every time like I talk about wrestling to my dad, he's always like, it's all fake, right?
Like,
and my answer is always like, yeah, don't you? Like, why do you feel like this is a discovery to you that you just? But it's always like, I figured that out a while ago that wrestling's scripted, and like, we know.
Like,
but I do
not
think
every movie is a documentary. It's like, trust me, I know what work of fiction.
Yeah, when like kayfabe was like all about wrestling in the 80s, I think boomers just got tricked and they were like, I think this might be real, and then when everyone was like, what are you talking about? Now they have to be like, wrestling's dumb. It's fake. Anyways, the reason I mention that is because I really like the way that this long fight scene, it really kind of uses the the tropes of wrestling choreography and kind of mixes it with movies and creates like on paper it's like kind of a boring fight scene, right? They're just in an alleyway and like beat each other up, but it is a like fun as hell, like two dudes wrestling and boxing and slapping and jumping, and it's great.
And of course you care about these characters too, and like seeing them kick the shit out of it, it's just like, no, please, we want you guys to like team up. Like, I'm having fun, but the longer it goes on, it's just like, come on. And I feel like almost in a way John Carpenter's talking about us and how we constantly beat each other up as opposed to concentrating on who's really on top of us and who's really in control, and instead we just constantly fight each other, and it's gone on for so long, and it's ridiculous, just like this fight scene.
Yes, actually, I was about to bring this up. Do you know Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian philosopher?
Wait, did he do the Pervert's Guide? Yeah.
First off, let's go ahead and say fuck Slavoj Žižek. He is a TERF and has said like some really shitty things about trans people recently. So when I say that I like his point here, let's also just qualify that with he's a TERF. Fuck
Absolutely.
him. But he, in Pervert's Guide to Ideology, he did one Pervert's Guide to Ideology and then Pervert's Guide to... It was either cinema or the movies. I can't remember which one. But he has a whole thing about They Live, and I do want to read part of what he wrote, because he basically he is saying that this scene represents like humanity's like fight with themselves, that like dichotomy of like being able to recognize that you're being tricked but not necessarily wanting to face it.
Right.
And so what he says is that it is man fighting with himself. So it's either, because Roddy Piper says, either put these glasses on or start eating from the trash can. And Žižek says that the trash can is the ideology of capitalism, and we are already eating from it daily. But the force of this ideology makes us blind to the trash we're eating. So capitalism feeds us the garbage we need to survive, and we consume it without thinking or realizing it. And the glasses in the film allow us to see the garbage we've been eating for what it is, and who's been feeding it to us. And Žižek says that these glasses allow us, his words are, to see the dictatorship behind our democracy. And really, it's just like the fight represents like humans' natural resistance to examining hard truths, and that might be painful or uncomfortable. And here's Žižek's quote that I really like on it. He says, "To step out of ideology, it hurts. It's a painful experience. You must force yourself to do it. This is rendered in a wonderful way where John Nada tries to force his best friend to put the glasses on. It's the weirdest scene in the film. The fight takes 8 to 9 minutes. The fight seems irrational because why does this guy reject so violently to putting the glasses on? It is as if he is well aware that spontaneously he lives in the lie and the glasses will make him see the truth. But this truth can be painful and can shatter many of your illusions. This is a paradox we have to accept. The extreme violence of liberation. You must be forced to be free. If you trust in your spontaneous sense of well-being, you will never be free. Freedom hurts." How do we like that interpretation? I mean, I know it's a big goofy scene, but I love like part of why I love Žižek is because he gives so much like credence to goofy scenes in movies. So like,
I think he hit the nail on the head. Honestly,
it's
that's
like
perfect.
It is kind of like the turning point of the movie of like opening your eyes. Like in this scene, it's not Nada and Frank are not two different people. They're kind of a representation of like how we fight ourselves when like we know we're looking at something awful and like kind of that initial denial of it or whatever.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so ultimately, Frank does put the glasses on, and they find themselves kind of brought in by this group of other people who have. Are they developing the glasses? I don't remember.
The glasses were developed, and then when they go to the meeting, they've created contact lenses.
Right.
Like, the technology's already gone further. What are they called? The Hoffman lenses.
Okay.
Which
that must be a reference to something.
The creator of LSD, I believe.
Oh, okay.
From what I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me look up.
Yeah, I hope I'm not wrong about that. I'm pretty sure.
Lenses. They live. Cut this part out of me Googling things. Cut that out. Oh wait, I got shitty Wi-Fi. Doesn't matter.
Oh no.
So yeah, they join up with this group who are aware of the alien overlords and actively fighting against them. And at a meeting of this group, we get some heavy kind of expository downloads revealing the plans of the aliens, that they're attempting to use up Earth's natural resources to expedite global warming and make Earth more akin to their own home planet. And we also learn that many humans in positions of power have been bribed to go along with the aliens' plans. But again, the meeting is raided by the police. Again, we see how the police are kind of the instruments of capitalism, and most of the plotters are killed. What do you make of the second police raid of our heroes?
I honestly, it's one of Justiceville is horrifying, but actually getting to see the faces of the people that have been labeled terrorists being blown away, and watching them try to help others escape, and seeing the people they're helping getting out, and they're just getting completely savaged. It's a very effective scene, and it's kind of soul crushing in a way. It's one of the scarier moments in They Live. If I'm being honest,
and it again feels prescient because it really feels like a lot of some of the social movements we've seen lately and how they've been stifled. You said, I'm trying to look it up now, the author's name, but you just mentioned that they are, seeing them, calling them terrorists, and seeing their organizational efforts, which reminds me of this book that I read. I'm not going to be able to pull the author's name, but it's called, I believe it's When They Call You a Terrorist, and it's written by like a boots on the ground Black Lives Matter organizer, kind of about the being labeled as like a terrorist because you are organizing these events that are pushing against the capitalist system. So that's kind of what we see. And I do want to note too, as we Hal and I kind of love seeing like the recurring themes that pop up in like very disparate movies, and we've covered a few movies like about kind of social organizing, and I think this movie very much is like, it's a B plot in the movie, but I think it does like really represent what social organizing kind of looks like in America. It feels like their meetings feel squalid. They feel like in secret because they know that they're in danger just by like having the meetings or whatever. And this is, it's kind of fun to, have you seen BPM? Beats per minute, 120 beats per minute.
I have not seen that one.
So that was one episode that we did, which is about ACT UP Paris, the AIDS activism organization, and like all about organizing. Obviously gets way more into the weeds about like kind of the minutia and interpersonal relationships of like organizing events, and like how to, and more realistic, obviously, because it's about true events. But you should check it out. It's really good.
Man. I appreciate the heads up.
Which brings me to something I really want to talk about in this, which is, I think this is a larger conversation too, but I think conservatives are watching movies wrong, because there's like so many times where like conservatives have come out as like big fans of a thing, and then it's like, how? I don't understand. And I think They Live is like one of the ones that is so, especially like I feel like in the era of COVID and misinformation, like so many shitty like right-wing memes using the like obey and consume as like anti-vax like stuff, which is a nightmare. But conservatives love misinterpreting leftist movies. The one that really stands out to me is The Matrix, which is a film written and directed by two trans women that is, among other things, an allegory for being trans, but has nonetheless resulted in nearly every transphobic bigot with a podcast or a YouTube channel to unironically use the term red pilling to mean being exposed and open to idea of trans or other forms of bigotry. Are you familiar with red pilling on the internet?
I've heard of the red pilling.
It's like first off, it's like the dorkiest shit ever. Like,
no doubt.
Like they all brag about like what red pilled them, and I'm like, y'all are. What you're saying is like here's the propaganda that fooled me is like what I hear every time. But with that said, They Live ranks right up there as a film that morons love to misinterpret. And I feel in the aftermath, like I said, of the pandemic and the conservative outrage around mask mandates and vaccines, the explosion of those They Live memes, what other movies come to mind as like getting misinterpreted as like what I think could be only perceived as leftist perspective being kind of warped and turned? Do you have any that jump out?
You know, the first thing that comes to mind, it's the band Depeche Mode. I remember, like, what, neo-Nazis or whatever?
Richard Spencer.
Holy shit, it's like, get the fuck out of town with that.
Yes.
No. And I'm so glad Depeche Mode came out. I was like, wait, no, please.
That is awesome.
We do not condone anything that you stand for or live for, and get the fuck out of my music.
For those of y'all that don't know what Kevin mentioned, it was Richard Spencer, neo-Nazi, famed for getting his shit fucking rocked on TV while wearing a Pepe pin at Trump's inauguration. He is in like a field of many awful right-wing bigots online. He ranks like among the worst. like just an out-and-out white nationalist, believes in Great Replacement theory, is for what he calls the peaceful cleansing of ethnic minorities. And he once said that Depeche Mode was his favorite band. He also like fancies himself like a fancy little like sophisticated intellect boy, and he came out and said Depeche Mode was his favorite band, and the lead singer of Depeche Mode immediately came out and was like, "Fuck you, we don't like you, and we hate you."
Please stop.
Yeah, that's great. But movie-wise, I know the other one that I always see like being warped for like conservative use. I mean, more of a novel, but 1984, I feel like is constantly being used in like. And that one is especially irritating because George Orwell was just an out-and-out socialist, and so it is so annoying. But the other one is, I feel V for Vendetta is always like...
oh, man. I didn't even realize they were picking on that one.
Like, I mean, I feel because that's like conservative dorks see themselves as V. It doesn't matter, to me, like, it doesn't matter what the thing is they're fighting. They see themselves as V, and there's no, like, look into the villain of V for Vendetta is, like... right-wing fascism,
of course,
but like dum-dums are just like, oh, government V, we like this guy. I don't know. V for Vendetta is right up there with the Matrix as conservative ding-dongs fucking up watching movies. So yeah, as we get on to the kind of the climax of the movie, we have Nada and Frank who find themselves, they get transported to this spaceport, and they are now, I believe, equipped with the Hoffman lenses. Yes, we have the Hoffman lenses, and they get to this hub, this somewhere off planet that the aliens have been using to coordinate the kind of bureaucratic aspects of global domination, which I love all that shit. Just like the like behind the scenes of do you know what it reminds me of? Do you watch Big Mouth? The Netflix show?
I haven't watched it.
Do you know the general like premise of Big Mouth?
No.
It's like it's animated. It's by Nick Kroll and John Mulaney as a voice, but it's basically like little like pervert 13-year-old boys like going through puberty, but all of their like hormones are anthropomorphized, so they get visited by like hormone monsters that are like some of them are just like Nick Kroll's hormone monsters, just like distilled id, just says like the nastiest shit constantly, and it's like the boys have to like fight with this hormone monster, just like. But brilliant. There's a few episodes where they go to the hormone monsters like work, and it's just an office setting where like other hormone, and that's what this part in They Live reminds me of, is like, yeah, this is dumb shit. Somebody's got to cover the paperwork of taking over the planet.
Like these concrete hallways,
right?
Yeah.
So they, so they go to this hub and they discover that the aliens have been using a transmitter to brainwash humans into seeing the obey and consume propaganda as normal. And Frank and Nada also run into a few acquaintances that they realize have been collaborators all along. Specifically, is it Holly? Is her
Holly? Yeah, like Holly Thompson, kind
of the love interest of the.
There's definitely like a sort of an affection there.
Yeah, so she turns out to be one of the like big traitors to them, and we see Frank and Nada, assisted by Holly at the time, kind of fight their way through the spaceport to destroy the signal, and both Frank and Nada are killed by the aliens, but they do manage to destroy the signal that's brainwashing the world, and Rowdy Piper has one of the great like movie death sign-offs.
You're not kidding, man.
Of just, biting the bullet and then flicking the bird and I'm out. Yeah.
Fuck yeah, dying for the human race. Hell yeah, baby.
Hell yeah. And again, I think a good like allegory for when like it is always going to be the working class that have to fight back first, and the first ones that are going to be hurt or going to be killed are always going to be working class people. And specifically, I think again a lot of that falls on a lot of the kind of subtext with Frank and Keith David is more specifically how black folks are usually going to be the first casualties in these kind of like uprisings.
Absolutely.
Because that's just the way our state has programmed itself, and but we love it. I love They Live. It's great. I hadn't seen it in a while, and I've now watched it twice in the last month because I watched it once to do the podcast, and we also showed it here at Cap City couple weeks ago, and it was a pretty good turnout. I was
man.
It was great.
People love that movie. I think the right people get that film.
Yeah,
honestly.
Well, while we're talking about it, next month I'll be interested to see because this next one is not a crowd pleaser. I love this movie, but next month we're watching First Reformed, Paul Schrader's First Reformed, a great performance by Ethan Hawke. But I think we've been doing these screenings now at Cap City here, and I think I've realized that the like kind of quieter, more meditative ones might be a little less fun for a Friday night hang. But First Reformed is awesome. So
hell yeah, incredible film.
Man, I sold the shit out of that one.
Yes,
come out and be bummed when you watch First Reformed. But yeah, so. One thing I do want to mention, and I know Hal would want to mention this as well because we've talked about it a lot. And do you listen to Killer Mike?
Yes.
Of Run the Jewels?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So first off, I'm high on Killer Mike right now because he has put out a 3 or 4 song EP. He's doing his first solo album in like a decade. And he's talked on it, like he said, like he just felt like there were things that he had to say, like personally, not with LP from Run the Jewels.
Right.
There's no bad blood. Actually, LP is on one of the tracks, and I think produced a couple of them.
Oh, fantastic!
But Killer Mike has a great track from his album called Rap Music called Reagan. Oh, wonderful! Which I think is like if Hal and I kind of breaking down Reaganomics was a little too verbose for you, the 3.5 minutes that it takes to listen to his song Reagan will catch you up to speed pretty quick. I feel like that's a good primer. And it also talking about good sign-offs with John Nada giving the bird. Do you know the sign-off on the final verse of Killer Mike's Reagan?
Glad Reagan's dead.
I'm glad Reagan dead. A great sign-off there. But well, Kevin, this was a lot of fun. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to add to John Carpenter's They Live?
I think the time is right for a legacy sequel.
Oh my fucking god.
Because, you think about it, that ending, because it was just the local television station, they could say it was all a prank. Like, the aliens could easily say, oh, this is like War of the Worlds.
Okay.
And make it take place now.
Who are you casting would be my question.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like the corporate overlords would really push for Ronda Rousey because of the WWE heir to the Rowdy name, but that would be a bad idea.
I'd say get Kurt Russell's son, Wyatt Russell.
Oh, I like that guy too.
So there's kind of that lineage there.
I was trying to go another wrestler. Who's a wrestler that I think? Oh my
gosh, a wrestler we could get.
Okay, I got one. I think Seth Rollins.
Dude.
I think Seth Rollins would be dope.
Wow, because
he's got swagger,
acting, right?
He's actually, I think I just saw he's going to be in a Marvel movie.
Oh, dude,
I don't think maybe like a C-level henchman or something. But Seth Rollins is like hella fun. He can do drama. Also, okay, I have a weird thing that do you have a thing that gets you in movies, like the thing that you know is going to kind of make you tear up a little bit? Like if it's like, I'm not talking like in a specific movie. I'm talking like if this trope shows up, it will get you.
Yeah.
So mine is like people coming together to like celebrate either like a common good or like a tragedy.
No doubt.
And every time Seth Rollins wrestles, I get that because do you watch wrestling enough to like know his theme song is like it's just like a 3-note like but now he's become such a star that like every time he's introduced, it's just 5 minutes of the crowd just serenading him, and like I get like shivers, and like I'm just such a dork that like I feel like Seth Rollins and They Live would be awesome.
I would very much like to see that, man.
And then who would be Keith David?
Oh my gosh, who's our most Pam Grieriest actress these days? The actress who played she was in Bad Times at the El Royale, and she played Harriet Tubman.
Yeah. Shit, I almost pulled her name and I can't.
Oh man, I can't think of it. I feel terrible.
I have a good one. Stay with me.
Okay.
I like Zendaya.
Oh.
Seth Rollins, Zendaya, the They Live sequel.
They Live still, man. Make it about social media. Yeah.
And I think like that is very prescient that I think you named the black woman in our They Live sequel, because I think what we said before is that it's so often left to like black men who are the like casualties of state violence so often, and even more so, I think that like forgotten people so many times in these organizing movements are black women, and I think our hypothetical, and also I think she would have to be the star.
Oh, of course.
Like, keep the same dynamic, but it's not John Nada's movie or whatever new version of John Nada. It's got to be the Zendaya.
Yeah, it's 2023. We'd have to talk about how Reaganomics is still with us, how it's affected us, where we're at now. And I think it'd be a really powerful movie. And with the legacy of They Live, I mean, people would show up in droves, I think. Yeah. So I hope whoever's listening out there,
please. I was going to say, hold on, Hollywood, we have an idea.
The Blumhouse, come on. Jordan Peele, I got an idea.
All right, cool. Well, anything else, Kevin, that we want to add to our episode of They Live?
Oh, man. I don't know. Keep your eyes open. Don't fall asleep. Stay awake. Keep up with what's going on, and just keep in mind they live, baby.
Hell yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast.
Dude, my absolute pleasure. It's an honor. This has been a lot of fun, man. Thank you so much.
And Hal will be back. I mentioned before we had a little bit of a audio issue, and Hal was traveling, and we just couldn't make it work. Hal will be back for our next episode, which our next episode is... I'm glad that I remembered to say this because I wanted to mention it, is we did our series of conservative films with Ben Shapiro, and we really liked watching Ben Shapiro's stupid movies. But we also don't want, like, every time we watch a conservative movie to be, like, dunking on, like, really shittily made movies. So we wanted to, like, pick some conservative movies that, like, have some, like, cinema IQ at least. So our next 3 conservative movies is we're going to watch some latter-day Clint Eastwood directorial efforts. And our first one that we'll be watching is our next episode. We're going to watch American Sniper, a movie that is straight dog shit, and I am excited to talk with Hal about it. So, yeah, if you guys want to watch American Sniper beforehand, don't pay for it. It stinks and it's awful, and but we're going to talk about it. So, yeah, that'll be the next episode. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Who the fuck is that? Staring in my window, doing that surveillance on Mr. Michael Render. I'm dropping off the grid before they pump the lead. I leave you with 4 words. I'm glad Reagan dead.